15 minutes late to record today, and I have not done any of the homework. And the topic that we're talking about today is perfectionism, which clearly is not a huge issue for me anymore because I'm like a fly by the seat of my pants, roll with it kind of gal. But I do have some areas of perfectionism that I have not yet conquered. How about you?
I think everybody should learn to be less perfectionist. I have this hypothesis that perfectionism is actually quite egotistical and not healthy for us. And there's a component of egoism in perfectionism, but there's also a component of conditioning and punishing ourselves for never being good enough when there is no good enough. If we ever achieve something that we think is good enough, that's never going to be good enough. There is no winning this game. There is no winning. So I hate perfectionism and we're accustomed to it. So what I wanted to
Okay,
talk
so
about was that you and I often will be really hard on ourselves. And we didn't
yes.
do this right, or we didn't had a difficult decision here, or we said something we regret saying, and we berate ourselves a lot. And oftentimes the one of us who's not doing that to ourselves will say to the other, what would you say if I did that? And invariably we say, well, you should give yourself some grace, and you're not perfect, and you're perfect for not being perfect. And it's this weird juxtaposition that we can be so hard on ourselves and yet looking at someone else doing the exact same thing is perfectly fine and acceptable.
So I was initially wondering how we would define perfectionism, and I think you kind of got at some of that, which was just being really hard on ourselves for making mistakes or for
Yes.
not doing it in a definition of perfect. And I think that's really part of where the problem lies. Is the definition of perfection something external that other people or culture or conditioning have put upon us, and then we internalized so that we now place it upon ourselves to try to be perfect. And I think the definition for me of perfect is flawless and mistakeless and efficient, all of the things that people strive for, but has to be done precisely.
So this is exactly why I wanted to talk with you about this, because even looking at the definition of perfection, there is no flawless, right? Everything could be
Right.
done better. Even if you do it perfectly, there's always a better way to do it.
Say more about that.
So there is no such thing as perfect. I think the definition of perfect is by definition, you will never be good enough. It will never be to the point that you're saying that's perfect. I've never done anything in my life that was perfection, never, because it doesn't exist. There always is some little bit more that you can do. Even a gymnast who's getting a 10.0, there's always a little flair that you could do, or point your toe a little bit better. There's always a little bit more that they could do. So I think even the concept of perfection is flawed because there never is going to be perfection, especially for humans who are busy and flawed.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what that does to us to live in a state of never good enoughness.
I'm very easy to punish myself for things that are really not that big a deal. And they're imperfect for sure. And I make mistakes. And one of the things that I've noticed lately is that I say things with confidence that aren't true. I just
Oh,
do. And I don't know why I do
okay.
that. And there's stupid things like, what's his room number? Oh, 510. No, it's 512. Oh, sorry about that. I mean, just like confidence. And I think it came from my career where I had to say confident things. And I am most of the time right when I say things with confidence, but I punish myself so much for those things. I feel sick to my stomach all day when I say something with confidence that turns out not to be true. I really hate that. I'd like to get to a point where I say, oh, that was dumb, and then move on.
Wow. Yeah. So I've started to find that for me, I don't worry as much about the little things or the things that I know don't have a huge consequence if I'm wrong. But what gets me are the things where I perceive that the consequence is dire, that that's for me more of a problem.
What are the
That,
examples of that?
okay, since we're going here, let's go here. A week ago, I said something out loud in front of my children that I deeply regret. And I think that I hurt them by saying it. My perception of the consequence is that I've damaged those relationships forever, irreparably damaged. They're going to hate me for life. And quite frankly, I think that they were over it in like an hour, maybe half a day at the most. But I stewed on it for days and days and days because for me, the consequence of losing that relationship is extraordinarily dire, which for me is much more of a problem than if I say something with confidence that isn't correct. And then I'm like, okay, whoops. Because I have no problem with, oh, that was dumb and move on. Because that's the one that I have gotten over. Although I suspect that for some people, it's kind of the flip side. Like you get yourself over every little tiny thing. And then I think a consequence of that is that you then feel tentative about attacking the big things because you're so hung up on perfecting the little things.
Yes, that could be. I'm trying to think to myself, if I were to say something that hurt somebody else and I felt like that could risk the relationship, I don't know that I've been in that situation. I think I'm less uncertain about the relationships that I have. And not saying that you're uncertain about them, but we talked about this, and I think that what you said was true or untrue.
What I said was a perception, was an opinion. I have always been extremely careful not to talk about my ex in front of my children because I want them to be able to have the relationship with my kids that they have. And what I realized is coming into the holidays, I was having this weird mix of hating him and also missing him, which was extremely confusing. And I've sort of resented that the things that have happened between us have prevented us from having the holidays as a family that we used to have. And that is not all of his fault. But because I've been so cautious about opening up to my children, it comes out sideways. And what I said to them was, your dad is not a good man. Which I don't know, maybe other people who are listening to that would be like, yes, so what? You said that about a guy who you'd think is not good. But I think it really hurt my kids. And so for me, I just had to take a few minutes to recognize what it was about what was going on inside of me that made me say that. Because that, for me, that is the perfection piece. I want to be perfect at not ever hurting people. Like you said earlier, perfection, you can't be perfect at that. If you are in relationships with people, you are occasionally going to step in it.
Right. And not to get too deep into the conversation that you had with the person that you felt like you hurt, I feel like that relationship is probably infinitely more strong than you think, and
Yeah.
that you don't need to be perfect to not risk that relationship. That's the way that I see it from the outside. I mean, that person is going to love you forever, flawed or not flawed. And I would argue probably being able to see you as a whole human being is easier to love someone who's flawed and
Yeah.
doesn't pretend to be perfect. And
Okay.
you're not
Yeah.
pretending to be perfect. I'm just saying
Yes.
that
Right.
you were hiding the authentic feeling you had about your ex from your kids, which is
Yes.
not imperfect in any way, but you were hiding that and this
And
authenticity
it
of
was
bringing it out.
making that come out sideways. Okay. So let's take that concept that you just described and apply it to all realms of perfectionism, which is that when we feel like we're not being perfect, we feel like we're risking something. And for me in that moment, it was risking a relationship. So, what is it that you are risking when you do or say things that you feel don't rise to the level of perfection the way you perceive it?
Right? I'm wondering if it's internal or external. So there is an internal conditioning that I have to be perfect. And if I'm not, then I'm nothing, which is quite a jump. There's a lot in between there where I could be actually a
Hmm.
genuine, flawed human being that's trying my best. So I think I'm trying to be perfect, one, for reputation, and two, because I'm so hard on myself. And of course, I'm probably hard on myself because I don't want to lose that reputation or relationships or respect from people. I think it's a little bit of both, a little bit of internal and a little bit of external fear.
Okay, so let's talk first about the external, and then I would like to move to the internal. So, externally, are you afraid that you might risk your reputation or losing respect from people in your peer group that perhaps you don't respect too, or who have done or said things that make you go, huh, but you do maintain a level of respect for them?
So that's interesting. That's very interesting. And that's bringing up a whole other conversation, which most of our conversations do.
Let's
And
do
that
it.
is that most of my professional career, I've put other people on a bit of a pedestal. And I always enter the room like I'm not the smartest and you have something to teach me. And I always sort of sublimate myself in a little way to other people. And I'm realizing now I'm old and successful and I've gotten everything that I've wanted, that I've worked for, the basic things that make me happy. You know, I have a roof over my head and I've got family and friends and kids who I love and I have two puppies. So like I've got a life that I really respect. And there's no reason for me to sort of sublimate myself under other people. So if you're talking about, am I fearing losing respect from people who I don't really respect? I think it goes even deeper than that, is that I've probably over respected people. And respect is the wrong word. I've overvalued people, undervalued myself.
And if I'm not mistaken, weren't you somebody that another company reached out to mentor younger people because you are so good at what you do? Did that not happen?
Yes, that did happen. That did happen.
Okay.
Yes.
So that feels like maybe the bigger picture is more internal. So let's talk about the internal. What are you risking internally if you are not perfect? Or if you do, in fact, damage your reputation? What are you risking?
So the older I get, the more I'm able to let go of that, at least professionally. I am the past 4 months or so, 3 months or 4 months, I have been putting myself out there in ways that are fun and silly and not entirely professional. And I really love it. And right now, I don't care if people perceive me as unprofessional or silly. I think this is more genuinely who I am. And honestly, I think the people I really want to work with are the people who are going to appreciate that I've put myself out there in a silly way. So, what we're talking about now is the pre growth that I've had in the last couple of years. And I think that internal part of it is fear of what other people would think of me. And then I would punish myself for that.
So talk about that journey then, from the pre-growth to the growth to where you are now. And recognizing too that none of us who are on this journey of overcoming perfectionism are ever going to completely achieve it.
Isn't that the funny irony of it?
That is a,
Never be perfectly imperfect.
all
So,
right, so go.
as most things in life, everything is a continuous journey. And if you decide you've stopped growing in something, then that's the farthest you're ever going to get. And that's fine. But I believe that everything can be continuous growth throughout your whole life, including the strive to not need perfection.
Can
So
I
I,
can
I
I
think
just
that,
qualify that just for 1 second?
yes,
For me, it hasn't been a continuous growth. It's been spurts. Spurts of
yes, I didn't.
growth sprinkled with moments of rest, like, okay, I've gotten to a good place. I'm gonna stop the work now for a moment and just enjoy the place and then do some more work.
For me, it probably came personally when I decided I didn't need a man in my life to be
Hmm.
whole. That's a big part of it. And there are so many ancillaries to that conversation. Then that was my personal growth of not needing perfection. And then the
That's interesting.
professionally,
Let me just say that's interesting that finding a partner was included in your perception of a perfect life.
yes,
And was that ever
internally, no.
something that you actually wanted, or was that conditioning?
It was conditioning. It
Yeah.
was conditioning.
So I think
Well,
recognizing that conditioning is one of the things that helps you move forward through it. Recognizing
absolutely.
it wasn't really what you wanted.
It's so hard to tear apart or tease apart what's conditioning and what do I really believe,
Very.
especially early in that journey. And
Hmm.
I was younger than I am now when I made that decision to have kids on my own without a partner. And obviously, the best decision I've ever made in my life.
Yeah.
Professionally, though, I think I've been going through a huge growth since I left the corporate America, corporate capitalistic area. And I started working for myself a little over 3 years ago. So the conditioning of corporate America and the colleagues who expect perfection and the reviews every year that expect things, and with the best review one could get, one could still not get a big enough raise to cover inflation. So it's actually a demotion. So we love you. You're doing great. You're working 80 hours a week, whatever it is. You're traveling all over the place. You're leaving your kids. You're giving up your soul for this company, but we're actually going to demote you. And so that sort of disconnect was a really hard thing to live under for so many years. And once I'm free from that capitalism, free from that someone else owning my life for a big chunk of my day, that's been a lot of the allowing me to grow into this. I don't need to be perfect.
I
I
just
wish I could.
was like massively triggered by that whole description of the corporate world. Because I feel the same way that being in that setting, I think there is something about someone else holding a paycheck over you that makes you feel like you have to be perfect or you won't achieve the breadcrumbs that they might possibly throw at you as a gesture of gratitude at the end of every year.
But even being perfect, we don't get any more than crumbs.
Yeah.
And I don't want to be ungrateful for the salary that I had. It's nice to have an income and it's nice to have a safe place to go. But well, being free from that and really having to rely on myself, I came to recognize that I wasn't trying to prove to anybody else that I was perfect. Didn't have to prove to anybody else that I was perfect. I could do whatever I wanted and I could make mistakes, and that was perfectly fine. I had to make mistakes in order to grow and learn to do what I'm doing right now. It's really hard to be on your own if you're unwilling to take a risk and make some mistakes.
So, how do you get to a place where the mistakes don't crush you?
Right. Right. That's so important. So I have a sign right here in my office, and it's a piece of paper that's torn in half for some reason. On one side of it are a whole bunch of blocks that say fail, and they're all crumbled on top of one another. And there's a little guy sitting on it with his head down, and it said failure. And then on the other side, all of those blocks are organized into a stairway, so a mountain that goes up and up and up. And at the top of that, he has his little hands up. It's a stick figure and it says winner. And so
Okay.
this idea of taking failure and making that a learning experience and being willing to go out and almost overtly seek failure, because learning from failure is what's going to get you to move forward. Always succeeding is not going to get you to move forward. It's not possible,
Yeah.
first of all, but it's not, there's not a lot to learn from continuous success, even if it did exist. How do you make growth from imperfection?
I started to ask the question, if I fail, then what? And when I really started going down that path of, well, what then? What then? What then? If I fail, well, then people are going to be mad at me. Okay. And then what? Well, if the people are mad at me, then they might retaliate against me. And then I had to ask myself, how true is that really? Are the people really going to retaliate? Well, no. Okay. So it's not about retaliation. Okay. So what's the consequence if they are mad at me? And I just had to keep going down that road until I would get to the answer, which was, well, maybe there's not really a consequence other than my discomfort, right? For a time, I'm going to be uncomfortable because someone is mad at me for something. And when I realized that my discomfort was the consequence, and I realized that discomfort does not last forever, it's always episodic, then it made that whole experience so much less because I was always worried about some big bad something out there. Like when you're a kid and they tell you that this it's going to go on your permanent record and you're terrified of that your whole elementary school and your middle school and then even in high school. Oh my gosh, I'm going to go on my permanent record. And then you grow up and learn there is no permanent record and nobody cares. Nobody cares. There's not ever been a single time in my entire life when anybody cared if I got an F on a paper in third grade. Nobody cared. But the system had developed this big, scary boogeyman of that permanent record. And I feel like the same thing happens with us with perfection. Like we're conditioned to believe that if we fail, there's this big, huge consequence out there, but we're not going to tell you what it is. Or it might be different every time, or it might be it's just this big unknown something. And when you really really truly break it down, it's not usually anything that can't be overcome by just sitting in that discomfort and moving through it and letting it pass.
I wonder if our systems are set up in such a way to use fear of lack of perfection as oppression and control.
Ooh, wow. Yeah. Okay, say more.
The school system needs you to behave and to work really hard, and therefore they created this boogeyman of your permanent record. In a relationship, the lack of perfection could mean that I'm going to leave you. Or in friendships, the fear could be, if you're not perfect, then I'm going to be mad at you. And that kind of triggered me when you said that, because I fear that I used to fear very much people being mad at me. I thought that was the worst feeling ever. I had this sick to my stomach feeling. But in reality, I'm trying to think of all my friends, all the people I'm in a relationship with. Am I mad at any of them? And have I ever been mad at any of them in such a consequential way that I would actually tell them that I'm mad at them, or that I stay mad at them, or that I act in any different way? I was very angry with a good friend of mine for months last year, and I'm totally, she's still great. I love her. I'm having her over. There's no consequence to this relationship, right? I don't even think we even talked it out. But somehow I used to think that other people could be so mad at me that it's going to affect my life, when that really isn't even probably true or permanent.
I
Or
feel like there's a complete through line from someone's mad at me equates I'm worthless. And I do
yes,
think I know where that comes from. It's systemic, but it's also childhood conditioning, which I think is generational to a large degree. The worthless feeling makes it very difficult, if not impossible, to be motivated to want to do more and do better. And
right.
so that discomfort, in a sense, then equates stuckness. There's no forward motion when we give in to the worthlessness that comes from people being mad at us, which
So
comes from us not being perfect.
we're sisters, and so we had overlapping authority figures in our lives when we were younger. And I do remember
Mhm.
one of the authority figures would constantly tell you and me how perfect we were and how much better we were than everybody else. And I wonder what kind of effect that had on us, expecting perfection of ourselves, even though that's not possible.
Yeah, and I think that there were two messages that we got. We were either perfect and better than everybody else, or we would make a mistake and we were worthless and not worth anything. And when you live in that kind of binary state, there's not a lot of wiggle room in there to make mistakes and learn and grow from them. There's only the striving for not ever making those mistakes, because the only alternative from perfection is worthlessness.
That's interesting. I did spend a bulk of my life in that binary, either perfect or worthless. And I think as the growth has developed, it's finding all that gray area in between of trying my best is really all I can hope for or work for.
I think there's a lot to this discomfort too. I think that we also, as a culture, do not know how to sit well with discomfort. So, years ago, we were talking about something similar to this. And you were talking about how you wanted to have a clean kitchen all the time. And how, with a young family, it's really hard to have a clean kitchen all the time. You can get it completely clean and go upstairs to go to the bathroom and come back down and there's something. And I suggested to you that you do all the dishes and leave a fork in the sink just so that it's not perfect. With the purpose being that you know that that fork is still there and it's uncomfortable, but it's a safe way to practice discomfort. And so that's sort of become a thing between us now, is like it's a fork in the sink. Every time that we're starting to feel a little bit discomfort and want to run from it, we instead now can say, okay, I am really uncomfortable with this, and I'm going to sit with it and I'm going to look at it. I'm not going to overanalyze it or overthink it, but instead I'm going to just let it be, process it, and then move on, because it will pass.
To this day, I use a dirty fork in the sink as my mantra when I'm struggling with something that's uncomfortable or that I really want to change, but know that I just can't.
Yeah, and that's not a perfectionism issue. That's a control issue. And part of perfectionism is lying to ourselves to that we actually have control over things that we really truly don't and never did and never will.
So it's interesting. Is it being comfortable with the discomfort, or is it wanting to avoid the discomfort altogether, or is it redefining that feeling so that we're not uncomfortable with it anymore? Because I have learned how to sit in discomfort, and I don't like it. It makes my stomach hurt. I've said that several times today. I have a physical reaction to discomfort, emotional discomfort. But if there was a way that I could make my mistakes, be flawed, and say something stupid that's just not true, and then not be uncomfortable about that, I think for me, that would be the perfect outcome, so to speak.
Okay. And is it possible to do that? To always be in a place where you don't become uncomfortable?
No,
Is it even desirable to do that? I mean, on an emotional level, yes, we don't want to be uncomfortable, but on a growth level, do we really think that we can achieve any kind of growth without that discomfort? Because growth is uncomfortable.
you're absolutely right. I think it's not then a matter of differentiating between the things that are just mistakes and stupid and not really worth getting upset about and not really worth trying to grow from those, and the things that we actually use to propel ourselves forward in maturity and wisdom.
Here's what it is for me. I am okay with the discomfort that I know I'm going to create by a particular action that's moving me forward in growth. I am not at all okay with discomfort that comes out of the blue for me because I wasn't expecting it. So I want the discomfort itself to be somewhat in my control. Like I knew it was coming, so I was prepared for it. I knew it would be uncomfortable, but that's the only way to move forward. Those one I'm okay with. It's the ones that like this one I was talking about earlier, that something slipped out of my mouth that I did not see coming. And that really was devastating for me because I didn't have time to prepare myself for what I said and did, or, for the discomfort of pushing myself to that place where I would do that or say that. If you like the content, please like and subscribe and comment. All of those things are really good for the algorithm, which we are trying so hard to build. We want to build a community here because there are important conversations to be had. So we are humbly asking, please do subscribe and like and comment.
So this is interesting. I think it might be worth taking a moment to identify what is the learning that we'd like to take from that mistake or that imperfection. Is it something we can learn from? Maybe it's worth us trying to identify what is the mistake and was it really a mistake? So if we're going to learn from it and it wasn't a mistake, maybe that's what we're learning from it. And if it was truly a mistake, do we learn to try to do better or what? So in the case where you were saying something that hurt a loved one, was that a mistake?
I do believe that it was a mistake, partly because it was not something I was anticipating ever saying out loud, but I was able to learn from it. So it was a mistake in the sense that it wasn't intentional forward growth. It was just something awful that I said out loud in the heat of the moment. But the only way that I was able to move through that, because the very first thing that I did was call you and process it. And my initial reaction was I really just want to like curl up in my bed and stew over it. But I knew that that was not going to move me towards forward growth. And I actually knew that I would be in discomfort longer if I ignored it or tried to hide from it. So I called you and processed it. And the thing was that I had to move through an incredible amount of unpleasantness. But within 45 minutes of us talking, probably less, I had gotten to a place where I realized that even that mistake served a purpose. It taught me that I had been withholding my authentic self from my children and that I can be authentically myself and I can let them know without bashing their father that the relationship that we had was very difficult for me. I can let them know that I am not always 100% totally fine with whatever life he's living right now without bashing him. But I needed to find that place where I needed to say a hurtful thing out loud like that in order for me to recognize how inauthentic I had been with them. So in a sense, mistake, I would say it was unplanned. More than a mistake, I would say that it was an unplanned, uncomfortable event. And I don't want to ever do or say things to hurt my children for the sake of growth. On the other side of it, I recognized that it was growth that I needed to do. So
It's
I was
interesting.
able to make something out of it.
I think that's the best part of being imperfect is to learn from it. But it's interesting to me how it really does come back to, on a fundamental level, you're afraid of someone being mad at you, i.e., damaging that relationship, as you were saying earlier.
Yeah,
That's the biggest fears of imperfection.
with my kids, honestly, it's even more than them just being mad at me. I'm afraid of, oh, I didn't even realize this till just now. I'm afraid of pushing them towards that place where they recognize that I'm not perfect, which when you're 5, your parents know everything, and my kids are young adults now, so they already know that. But when I do something like that, that was unplanned and really quite spiteful, it pushes them to a whole nother level of recognizing that I'm a flawed human being. And I kind of don't want to push them there. I like that place where they still think I have all the answers for everything and that I never do or say anything improper. I like that place. It's comfortable for me. It's familiar. And I think I don't want to move them to a place where they look at me and go, "Okay, that's just a human being."
Oh, that's interesting. So you just being a human being is somehow a negative thing, but you being your authentic self and showing your feelings and helping them to grow as humans by seeing effects of your relationship, how your relationship has affected you and who you are as a person and your emotions. You think that just being a flawed human is worse than that.
So basically that's the same endpoint, but looking at it completely differently.
Right.
The whole point of the growth is to recognize that when we look at this, like, this is the path and this is going to get on my permanent record, and then realize that no, all that growth and the mistakes and the F's that I get eventually can serve a greater purpose. It really has everything to do with how we allow ourselves to process it, and the conclusions we come about it. The stories that we tell ourselves about the thing that happened make all the difference in how we feel about the thing that happened.
In my 20s, I heard something that really changed my life and continues to change my life. In Northern California in the 1990s, there was a radio psychologist called Dr. Dean Adele. He was such a clear, critical thinker. I loved listening to him so much. He was saying, other than the depression and the ADHD and the things that are diagnosed psychological disorders, other than those, a bulk of what's wrong with emotion is errors in thinking. And that was like a star coming out. All of a sudden, yes, that's exactly right. It's errors in thinking that I say this, I make a mistake and I say something stupid, and all of a sudden people will think badly of me. Well, that's probably an error in thinking. Maybe they don't even care, or maybe they feel good about themselves for being able to correct my mistake, or maybe your kids feel closer to you because you're being much more authentic with them. So it's just the error in thinking. If we could correct that, which is not that easy, if we can correct those errors in thinking and really look at the consequence of this imperfection, I think that will solve some of the discomfort or some of the difficulty.
I resist even calling it an error in thinking. I would even more qualify it as early critical thinking,
Yes.
as
Yes.
opposed to slightly more developed critical,
Thinking.
yeah, or emotional thinking. But you're right, it's about the narrative. It has everything to do with the story that we tell ourselves. And that's how I moved through. So we want to talk about how we got from that wanting to be perfect all the time to now where we can process it with a different lens, has everything to do with challenging the stories that we tell ourselves about the event that happened.
And I think we can even do some critical thinking on the definition of these things. We talked a little bit about how we define perfection. And I would say, in my current state, which is not the final form, but in my current state, I would say that I no longer want to strive for perfection. I don't want that. It's not healthy. It's not achievable. I would like to strive to continue to get and be better. And to me, that's a much more achievable and healthy and critically thought through goal than to try to be
Mhm.
perfect.
And then I would also go back to earlier in the conversation when we talked about it being in spurts rather than linear, because I do think that there are legitimate times when it is okay to say, I just made a monumental leap in my own growth and I need a minute. Like, I just need to stop for a second. I've been in therapy a lot for a lot of years, decades even. I'm currently in a place where I'm not seeking a therapist and I'm not done growing, but I'm resting from that particular process of growth. And I'm not saying that I recommend to anybody that they quit their therapy because I'm only still here because of the therapy that I did. I do also think, though, that it can be helpful to take a moment sometimes and just exist in the most authentic state that I can be in the moment due to the growth that I've already done as I carb load for the next
Mhm.
sprint, you know?
They say when the student is ready, the lesson will be there. And I really believe that there's no forcing getting better. There is opening one's heart to getting better and maybe doing reading or thinking or talking to people or going to therapy, all of those things that will open up the opportunity for growth. But I don't think that there's any forcing it. And if someone is resting or not ready for that next growth spurt, they're not ready. And there's nothing one can do to change that.
So I have an interesting question. Is the idea that we need to continue to have forward motion itself problematic? Like, is
I
there
would,
an implication in there that the way that we currently are is also not good enough?
well, now you're throwing a whole wrench into
Yeah, I am. But I'm wondering, like, is there ever a time when we can just say, you know what, we're good the way we are now and not have to have that feeling of, yes, but I still have work to do. And maybe work will come in the future, but isn't it also okay to be like, you know what? I'm good where I'm at right now. I'm happy with my authenticity. I'm happy with my relationships. If I grow in the future, that's a future thing that I can deal with at the time. But it is perfectly okay to just be, not just, it's perfectly okay. It's perfectly acceptable and maybe even healthy to just love where I'm at now, to love who I am now, and not always be thinking that there's got to be some better version of me that I haven't attained yet. I mean, isn't that essentially what we're talking about for perfection? Like we're still striving for something else, and that prevents us from just being authentically contented and grounded and happy with who we are.
I love what you're saying, and I hate what you're saying. Because you're absolutely right. I would strive to be in a place where I say, this is good right now, and be in that, not be in the moment, but be where I am in my emotional growth, right? This is fine, and I don't need to strive for more. In my life, a lot of my imperfections have real consequences to my day-to-day living. Or maybe not even my imperfections or my mistakes, but I do have to work really hard just to maintain my lifestyle. And to me, that working really hard isn't a conveyor belt of just doing the same thing over and over again. I actually have to learn and grow and change just to maintain my life. And I don't mean my lifestyle like my income. I mean my immigration status and raising kids and making sure that all the bills are paid and that all the house repairs are done and all of those things. If I have an imperfection that, let's say, is procrastination or delay, then that has real consequences in my life. And so I constantly, my whole life, have felt like I need to do better because those real world consequences are negative in my life.
So all the things you just described are task oriented.
Yes.
Isn't okay to have a huge list of tasks ahead of us and at the same time be completely contented with this version of us that still has to attack the tasks
Not
rather
if one
than
of
thinking of it in terms of I can't attack the tasks until I'm a better person or I better be a better person at the end of the tasks. Like, can those tasks be something that this version of ourselves can just manage? Because we can manage those tasks the way we are now, with or without future growth.
I need for future growth because I'm a procrastinator. So the things that are not on fire, it's very, very easy for me to put them aside. And so that's an
Right? So
imperfection that I really need to
why?
change.
Why?
Because when things are on fire, they have real consequences to me and people in my life.
And how
So I need to
often
be,
do the on fire things come back to bite you in the butt because you
More than
didn't
I
do them right
want,
now.
more than I want them to.
More than a human should expect.
Well, that's a definition.
Yes.
I
And
don't
that's
know.
the story that we tell ourselves, right? You have a story that you're telling yourselves that when you procrastinate, it's because you're not a good enough person, and the consequence is dire. And what I'm suggesting is that if procrastination is part of how you operate, you can attack that as a task rather than a personality flaw.
Years ago, I heard a story about the company Warby Parker, who was a tremendously successful online glasses retailer. Probably they still are. I don't go online for glasses. But the story I heard about Warby Parker was that they had their investor and they had their board of directors, and they were going to go live on a certain date. And they had no name, they had no internet, they had their website, their technology wasn't built yet, they had no marketing plan. They were spending lots of time procrastinating all of those things in order to come up with the best name. And then once they came up with the name, all of the other stuff just fell into place. So their procrastination was actually baking an idea so that they came up with the right name. I'm not a marketing person, but Warby Parker is a perfect name for an online glasses retailer. And that
Hmm.
procrastination and that baking for the long period of time before they came up with that right name, while they put all of the other tasks aside, is actually one of the things that made them most successful. Maybe my growth will be to not punish myself so much for being a procrastinator. And maybe these things
Hmm.
just do need to bake for a while. And that's okay.
So I have a friend who is a pastor in a congregation, and I once upon a time was a pastor in a congregation. And her preaching style is to read the text a week or 2 weeks in advance. And then about a week in advance of the sermon, like the minute the one sermon's done, to start working on the sermon for the next Sunday. And then to sit down by Thursday afternoon or Friday at the very latest and write it all down so that it's done. My process is to read the text at least 2 days before and let it bake and let it soak. And then the night before, I'm telling secrets on myself. When I'm laying in bed the night before I'm going to get up and preach it, I craft an outline of the things I want to say. I craft the first line, I craft the last line. And then in the morning on my way to church, I would practice it out loud in my car. That was my process. And she used to get on me all the time for that. And then she told me a story about a friend of hers who did the same thing as I did. And one time, someone challenged him to write it ahead of time, and he did. And it was the worst sermon he ever gave because it was totally contrary to who he was and his process. And I'm the same way. If I were to sit down and write out something ahead of time, I wouldn't even probably preach it the same way. By Sunday, I would already be like, I'm somewhere else. So I guess what I'm wondering is if the procrastination isn't a personality flaw or something that needs growth as much as it is a style that you just need to be cognizant of when you're making your plans.
Yes, if we take that concept of procrastination as an imperfection or a mistake or a flaw in some way, and I look at that like it's an error in thinking, or who am I trying to measure up to in their organizational skills and they're being on top of all the bills and being on top of all the paperwork? Who am I trying to measure up to? I get it all done.
You
Maybe,
do.
maybe my error in thinking is that that's a flaw, and maybe it's just my
Yes.
style, like you're saying.
Yes. Yes. That's what I'm thinking. It's a different narrative you're telling yourself now. The
Exactly.
narrative that the procrastination is a flaw is a conditioned expectation. For me, I've started to just lean into those things that I used to consider flaws, like procrastination, and I don't look at it as procrastinating. Now I look at it as this is my timing. This is how I operate. This is how I best function. And it's not to make excuses and to be like, yeah, definitely, I'm more creative when I procrastinate, because that in itself is a narrative. What my narrative is, I know my process. And I know that this process works for me. And I don't need to freak out about it because I know that this works for me. I've done this process enough now to know that this timing works for me. And if I have something that doesn't work. Like if I consistently woke up Sunday morning and had nothing, I would know that the process doesn't work for me and I'd have to rethink it. But we get all the stuff done, and
So
maybe
what
we
I
don't get it
wish
done perfectly.
never gonna, there's
But
no
who,
such
like you
thing.
said, though, who are we impressing? Who are we trying to impress? We're trying to impress the permanent record.
Yes, the boogeyman, the permanent record. I wish for every woman, particularly, to have the time and the space, the emotional space to go look at what they perceive in themselves as their flaws, their imperfections, and
Mhm.
maybe try on a couple of different narratives to see what is actually the truth and the authentic methods, or the maybe the flaw isn't quite as much of a flaw as they thought, and maybe it's just their method.
I think one way we can practice that is to get into the habit of telling ourselves the same narrative we would tell our bestie,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Like give ourselves permission to give ourselves the grace to reshift the narrative for us. I think there's something about holding on to the narrative that we're not good enough that feels comfortable in some sort of way. It's serving some purpose. I think that the reason we sometimes hang on to the narrative that we're not good enough is because we're afraid of what if we are? What if we are all that and more? In a way, that's almost as terrifying as not being enough and more. I know how to be not enough. I've done it my whole life. How to be extra in the best sense is uncomfortable. And so I'm learning how to just lean into my extraness, into my eccentricity, into my procrastinating is just my rhythm. It's my rhythm. I love it now. It's how I operate. And I don't have to apologize to the permanent record for that. But it's scary to envision myself being successful at a thing, being the best at a thing, doing it right, because then I feel like I have something to lose.
That's interesting. I spent the last weekend at a hockey tournament, so the moms had a lot of time to sit and talk with one another. And I was talking to two in particular who are in their late 40s. And I told them, we were discussing how women could eventually find a place to say they don't give any fucks anymore. They were just discussing that concept. And I said around 50, I kind of flipped a little bit, that now
Mhm.
I care so much less about a lot of stupid stuff that I cared about before. And
Yeah.
one of them said, that she's very concerned about that happening to her because it's a very uncomfortable position to not give any fucks anymore. And she didn't want that to happen to her. And to me, this is a beautiful thing to let go of. Maybe because it's already happened to me, but I've let go of a lot of stupid stuff that I spent a lot of emotional energy on before that really is not important, but it's so much more comfortable to be hanging on to all of those things and to not let go and just be in the place of this is who I am and that's okay.
What does a misogynistic patriarchal society have to gain by keeping women scared of succeeding?
Everything. I would wager that 90% of our conversations can be traced back to our systems and our misogyny in the world.
We are conditioned to hate ourselves. We are taught to turn on each other. We're taught not to want to help other women, that other women are a threat. Our own success is a threat to us.
Yes.
Because when we succeed is when they try harder to put us down. So the fear of succeeding is both internal and it's external. And I can't control the external piece. That's the part where I have to don't give a fuck about. The internal piece is the reshaping of the story that allows me to accept and enjoy succeeding at it and crushing it. There were so many things in my life that I'm so fucking good at. And now I'm starting to really, really enjoy just being good at that. And I don't care about walking around and telling people I'm good at that. One time, I was talking to a colleague, a woman colleague in ministry, and I was saying how maybe I would like to reach out to the funeral homes and see if I could get put on a list of people who could come in and do services for folks that didn't have churches. And she said, that list is really long. They have a lot of people on that list that they would call. And I said, yeah, I get that, but as soon as they hear me preach one time, I'm going to be the top of the list every time. And she said, I wish I had half of the confidence that you have. But I knew my worth, and I knew that preaching and being present for people in that moment is one of the things I'm really damn good at.
You're so right. You really
Thank
are.
you. I think we have to practice saying that to ourselves. I'm good at this.
I wish that women could get there before 50. So in most
I
of my
do
life,
too.
I have a really good degree. And before, when I was younger, I would always hesitate and I would always sort of swallow it when someone said, "Where did you get educated?" or "What's your degree?" And I would say, "I have a degree in, I have a PhD in neuroscience from UC Berkeley." And I would swallow it and I would chew on it and I would like not want to be confident about that because there's no way to say, "I have a PhD in neuroscience from UC Berkeley" without sounding pretentious. But now that I'm
Yeah.
older, I don't, right? That's what
Pretentious
I did
is
and I
one
can
of
say
the
it.
things that are used to bring us down, right? You can't
Yes,
be
don't be pretentious.
arrogant, you can't be
Right.
pretentious,
Can't be
you can't be
self-important.
too confident. All of those things are negatives. And I think, no, they're not. They're not.
Right. It was keeping us down because I can't enjoy my success.
And you
And now
can,
I
you
can.
got a fucking PhD from UC Berkeley in neuroscience. Girl, you are damn smart, and you are smarter than all of those stupid ass people who think you're pretentious for saying so.
But the weird thing is nobody thought that. I
Right.
thought they would think
Dare
that and
you.
nobody actually thought that. So
Okay,
that was
so.
my letting I don't give any more fucks about people who think I'm pretentious because they didn't. And if they do, I don't care.
And I would say right there is exactly the process. I'm afraid they're going to think I'm pretentious and then challenge the thought.
Right.
Okay, let's say they do think I'm pretentious. What's the consequence of that? Then they feel uncomfortable about my success. Okay, so what's the consequence of that? To me, nothing. Or they think I'm pretentious and you challenge that. Oh, do they really? And maybe they don't think you're pretentious. So there's no consequence. Both ways, there's no immediate consequence to us for someone else thinking anything about us. There's no immediate consequence most of the time for that, for someone else's thoughts.
And because we think that the consequence to us is discomfort and the feeling of
And
having to,
stagnation.
yes,
It's
exactly.
self-imposed stagnation.
Right.
We re-
For
we
no
we keep
benefit.
ourselves from being all that and more because we're afraid of all of these other things that probably don't have consequence to us. So we
Right.
have to reshape that narrative. For me, that's an ongoing process, and that is the work. So I do actually want to continue to grow, but not because I'm not in a place that I'm happy with right now, but just because I'm excited about the things I can learn in the process, which is a very different thing than feeling like I'm not enough now.
I completely agree. I'd like to point out the irony of us, probably more often as women, diminishing our own importance or our own achievements in the interest of not sounding pretentious. And wanting to get over that is moving toward perfection, whereas diminishing our, our achievements is actually moving away from perfection. So it's this very
Yeah,
strange backward system of I want to be better by being more humble, but it's
it
just
is
silly.
just
We
silly. And you know what? I don't know a whole lot of pretentious men. You
no
know why? Because we don't place pretentiousness on them.
right, right. I can think of a few other words that I would use for some men,
Yes.
but
Yes, that's
but
fair. That's
pretentious is a
fair.
female thing, right? Right.
It
It's
is.
more
A lot of those self-limiting definitions are placed more on women because the entire world is afraid of women that succeed, that of women that can do more than they can, that
so. If
can,
you're listening to this, find your biggest accomplishment and practice saying it out loud with pride. Put back your shoulders.
yes,
Put
yes,
your head
back your
up.
shoulders. Say, I am fucking amazing.
Say it.
Am fucking amazing. And if you're listening, you are too.
You are too.
Don't let anybody tell you you are not, because you are. And you are just right now.
And there's no such thing as perfection, so let that go. It's only a
Let it
detriment
go.
to ourselves and our freedom.
Mhm.
So I'm going to bring it back to our conversation. I'm going to put my shoulders back, put my chin up, and say, this is a good podcast. We
Yes.
want you to learn something from it. We're confident in what we're doing, and we love talking to each other, and we love talking to you. So
Yes.
please like and subscribe and make comments because we want to hear from you.